Hey guys, my name is Matt and this is my story. I'm going to pick up where I left off last time. To summarize briefly, early on in life I declared war on poverty like Wilfred Brimley declared war on diabetes. And before I was 40 years old, I'd built my business to the point where if I sold everything and walked away, I wouldn't have to work anymore if I didn't want to. But instead of feeling a sense of accomplishment, what I felt was emptiness. So I'm going to pick up where I left off, and this is one of the critical points of the story, because this feeling of emptiness drove me to start exploring and understanding why it was that I was feeling this way. I've been very blessed that I've been able to surround myself with a good group of people who I can bounce ideas off of them and try to see insights that I might personally not see for myself. So to start out, I sat down with a friend of mine, a really good buddy. He's a real estate guy as well. He's also one of my hunting buddies, so we have a lot in common with each other. And we've got a standing coffee meeting that we meet once a week. So I told him what was going on and the things I've been feeling, and he listened to my story. And his first question that he asked me was, well, that's pretty cool if you can just sell your company and walk away. Do you think you're just going to go find a beach somewhere? And I answered him saying, well, I could do that, but knowing myself as much as I do, I think I would be able to find a beach somewhere for about a week if I tried really hard. And after that, I would be so bored, I would just start creating things to do with my time. And then he said, oh, okay, well, that's cool. Maybe you could be like a philanthropist or something like that. You do good things, and that'd be a rewarding way to live life. And I agree, and I believe in doing good things when you're able to and help others in need. Those are good and noble pursuits. However, I think for me, what I'm really searching for is something to do with my time, rather than just writing checks and handing them off to other people to go do stuff. So next I grabbed lunch with another buddy of mine, a really interesting guy, a great guy. He's pretty high ranking in a S&P 500 company. He's actually generated a lot more wealth over his lifetime than I have. He said, essentially, this problem is more common than you probably realize. The thing is, most people, when they start running into this problem, they've reached retirement age, so say late 60s, 70s, somewhere in that time frame. And when they start hitting this wall, they've typically already got grandkids, or at least they're going to have grandkids fairly shortly. And they typically naturally evolve into becoming professional grandparents. When you hit this wall earlier on in life is when you start running into problems. And he shared with me that he had actually run into this problem for himself several years ago. And what he did when he ran into this wall was he essentially moved the goalposts farther out, which means he got himself a nicer car, bigger house, started taking nicer trips, things of that nature. So he started working to sustain a wealthier lifestyle. And that's all well and good. I'm a guy, I appreciate nicer cars and nicer houses as much as the next person does. And I've done those sorts of things for myself in the past. So I can appreciate where he's coming from. But I also, I think I've reached a point in my life where I realize that those things are only temporarily satisfying. You enjoy them for a while, and then at some point you become accustomed to it, and then you naturally begin to start searching for something else. So finally I made a call to my life coach and had to sit down with him. He's a really interesting guy as well, very insightful guy. I explained to him what was going on with my situation. He basically listened to me and said, wow, that's really interesting. It's a really cool phase of life that you've gotten into. You should start exploring this and try to figure out where this comes from. And I've been at this long enough now that I know when he says this, what he typically means is journaling. So I came to journaling pretty late in life. I'm not naturally a writer. Even in school, I was not a very good note taker. And I had to start developing this intentionally for myself, mostly at the encouragement of my coach. But as I've kind of demanded this from myself, really sat down and demanded that I write down my own words and put them down on paper for myself, I've learned some things. I've learned, for one, it's hard to do. If you're not naturally good at it, that's a hard practice to do, to find your own words and to put them down. But I've also learned that it helps me understand myself to a deeper level than I'd understood before. I think that's a critical life skill, to dig deep inside of yourself and manifest these words from within yourself onto paper. And in fact, so much so, I think journaling is going to get its own video at some point in this channel. But more to the point in this story, what I started doing was taking the time to sit down and start journaling. And this was particularly difficult for me to do at that time because I'd worked myself into this deep hole with my professional obligations. But I took the time, I made myself sit down and do it. In fact, there was one weekend where I just took a whole Sunday afternoon, I just blocked it out for myself. I went to a coffee shop and sat down with nothing to do except for journal and started working through these things for myself. And in the course of doing that, what I was doing was not really learning so much more about career progression or life or anything like that. What I was really doing was learning more about me. And so in digging through these years worth of experiences and memories, I came across, sort of serendipitously, what was really driving me and where this years of work and sacrifice had really been coming from. And I'll tell you this short story to illustrate this. Right around this same time, I flew with my wife to California. I was going to be her plus one at this wedding. It was one of her friends getting married, so I was just going to be there for eye candy. When I was sitting around this table of a whole bunch of people I didn't know, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I just turned to the guy next to me and started talking to him. It turns out he was also a plus one at this wedding. He didn't know anybody else either. He's a hockey player, and I'd also played hockey, so we had that in common. He was in the process of getting his MBA, and I have an MBA, so we have that in common. And then I asked him what he does for work, and he said he was like a PR marketing guy. And I made this comment of like, well, you seem like you would be really good at that. Like you have natural social skills, and it seemed like it'd be right down your alley. And he said, yeah, well, actually, no. And he told me this story about how he had grown up always being like an awkward kid and feeling like he didn't really fit in and really struggling in social situations. And he just lived like that until he got to the point in his later adolescent years, I think, when he just decided that he was going to have to get good at it. And he just started practicing it. He just started inserting himself into social situations. And he had like a few friends in his family that he would get feedback from, and sometimes he would just bomb really badly, and he'd have to figure out, okay, what did I do wrong? What can I improve on? And he just sort of had this brute force method of developing social skills for himself. And he practiced that long enough that he worked his way out of it, and now to the point where it's actually his primary marketable job skill. And I'm listening to a story, and for one, it's just impressive to hear stories like this because there is something, I think, noble about that, about not buckling in the face of fear and just allowing this thing to keep beating you. You turn and you face it. You say, I'm not going to continue to live my life like this. I'm going to do whatever it takes to beat this thing that keeps beating me. I'm going to conquer that thing. I think that's a very noble endeavor. It's certainly more noble than just bowing down to it and living like that for the rest of your life. And over the course of listening to him in this conversation and then digesting it for myself afterwards, I realized that that's really what had been happening to me. I felt like this thing, for me it was poverty. It wasn't the social skills, it was the poverty that for me I felt kept beating me. And what's really driving me there in that situation is fear. You think that you're going to live your life this way, that this thing's going to keep beating you, and you have to turn and face it. You say, I'm going to beat this fear. I'm going to conquer this thing. I think that's good, but there's at least two fundamental dangers that I can think of in going about an approach in this way. And the first one is that this fight to overcome fear takes on a very deep meaning for you, and that's what happened to me. It took on this very deep meaning for me going on this quest to overcome fear, to the point where I had beaten it, but I didn't want for that fight to be over. I wanted to be able to keep fighting. And without that fight, it seemed like I didn't have any further meaning to work for. And that's a very timeless story. You can think of all sorts of classic stories that are essentially about this topic, and at least one cake song. He's going the distance. You can probably think of more examples yourself without putting a whole lot of thought into it. And the second danger, of course, is your opportunity cost. And this is something that I had alluded to in my first video that I made. In the process of going down this quest to beat fear, I had foregone a lot of other things for myself. I hadn't explored myself really as a person. To figure out what I enjoyed, figure out what I loved to do, what I was passionate about, things that made me tick. This quest to beat fear had taken on such a meaning for me that these other things just seem frivolous by comparison. So after 2 decades of living this life of confronting fear, it turns out that I had beaten poverty. I'd beaten the fear. It shouldn't be that surprising that after 2 decades of focusing on just this one thing, I was experiencing a deficit in a lot of other things. So as I began journaling and contemplating my life journey and everything I'd experienced up to this point and started realizing this for myself, I realized that on the one hand, confronting and conquering fear is noble, but on the other hand, if that's all you do, what you end up with is a fear-driven life. And having lived a fear-driven life, in fact all of my adult life, living a fear-driven life was ultimately very unsatisfying. And I didn't want to live the rest of my adult years that way. And as I started digging into this more for myself with the journaling, the word that I settled on for what I want to do with the rest of my life was fulfillment. On the surface, that seems like a very simple word. If you're an English speaker, you've probably heard that word for a long time. We all think we know what that means. As I've been digging into this for myself, because it's been the better part of a year now that I've been exploring this for myself, what I've realized is that's actually a very complicated word. It's not a simple word at all. And if somebody comes up to you and asks you what fulfillment means for you, it's very hard to give a complete, concise answer using your own words. And that's kind of strange, really, if you think about it, because I'm sure we could all admit that we're all individuals. What might be fulfilling for you might not be fulfilling for me, and vice versa. However, if you ask yourself, or if you ask somebody what's fulfilling for them, it's very hard to get a genuine answer. Very often what you'll hear is a repeat of either some kind of religious belief, because a lot of religions are centered around this concept of fulfillment, or you might get some kind of philosophical belief, because most philosophies are also centered around this concept of fulfillment. And by the way, that's true for most Western and Eastern schools of thought. They just approach it from different ways. And now, in the absence of any other answer, it's useful to borrow answers from a religious source or a philosophical source. It's good to at least have some kind of orientation in that direction. If you don't have any kind of orientation towards fulfillment, you're really without any kind of a compass, and that's kind of a scary place to be. But that does still fall short of having an answer for yourself with your own words. And by the way, using your own words is also a very powerful concept. I'll make another video about that at some point in this channel as well. But I think what I'm trying to say here is that I lacked, and in a way I feel like I still do lack, a complete understanding for myself of my own fulfillment and what it means for me. I think I have a better idea now than I did last year when I first started running into this situation. But it's still something that I'm exploring for me. So in my next video, and actually probably in my next several videos, I'm going to start breaking down this process of how I'm going about trying to approach this topic of fulfillment. But I'm trying to build this foundation for myself so that as I set out for the course of the rest of my life, I can have something better than fear that's driving me forward towards this place that I want to go, this new mountain that I want to climb. So if there's something that I've said here in this video that resonates with you, if you've had thoughts along these lines, or if this is just something that you have an interest in and you want to hear more, please feel free to click the like and subscribe button. If you have any thoughts, please share them in the comments below, because like I say, this is something I'm actively exploring for myself. It's not something where I feel like I've developed all the answers. So I'd like to hear more from you if you have any thoughts along these lines. If not, otherwise, if you've made it this far, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time.
And call Liberty. They can help you live a better life.